All right. Hey, guys. This is your host, Thomas Tyree, here from OntheHop Podcast. Today, I got some special bonus content for you guys. I'm joined by two co-hosts, joined by the host of the PSP podcast, PSP himself, and another special guest today, World Champ, coming on the Hop Podcast today. So, gentlemen, I'm glad that you guys joined on the Hop today. And I'd like to say thank you guys for joining and the things that you guys are doing in the podcast world. This is what I want in 2025. The best that I see joining together, talking about sports, chopping it up, and we're here today. So thank you, gentlemen, for both joining the episode today.
Thank you for having us, man.
Thank you for having us. A privilege, a pleasure, and an honor to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to, especially with the things we're gonna talk about NFL and some wrestling in the WWE world. But we're gonna kick off talking about the Commanders making the NFC Championship game this year. This is the first time they made it since 1992. So PSP, you being a Commanders fan, I'll start you off first. How do you feel about the Commanders making their first NFC Championship appearance since the early 90s?
Unfathomable. I mean, words cannot put into perspective exactly how it feels to get to the NFC Championship game. Actually, first time since 1991. So you got to go like 33, 34 years. And
Yeah.
I'm shocked because I still can't believe we actually beat Detroit at Detroit, which is not an easy place to play. And to do it with a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who should be the favorite for Rookie of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year, and to do it with a head coach in Dan Quinn, who I had skepticism of, as well as the offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. At one point, I actually said I wanted him going because I had issues with his second half adjustments. And for him to, and for all of them, everyone collectively for Washington to get this far, man, words cannot put it into context. What I'm so happy about is that we've moved on, meaning we've moved on from the Dan Snyder ownership to now the new ownership and Josh Harris and Magic Johnson. If we were still in the Dan Snyder era, I would be more shocked, more amazed. I am still kind of shocked though, but not as much though, because we're in a different organization, different ownership. So there's nowhere to go but up. But for the Commanders fans, Burgundy and Gold, it's a dream come true, man. We got a few days until Sunday. I'm really excited. I know a lot of DC fans, a lot of Commander fans are really excited as well, and they should be very proud, very happy. And win or lose on Sunday, the future's bright. That's one thing for sure because of the ownership. I saw Chance video, his TikTok videos. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Chad. $100 million we
Yeah.
have saved up for. So not only that, we could address the issues that Washington needs. The offensive line, as I've mentioned numerous times on my pod, as well as other pods. Um, and of course, our defense. We got to improve our defense, particularly our run defense. But I love the direction where Washington is going. I think we're only going to get nowhere but better. And mark my words, this is just the beginning. This is not a fluke or an aberration.
I agree with it. That was some good stuff right there, especially the fact that, yeah, the ownership is very important as well. I think the ownership for all 32 teams should be important, putting together any team that wants to be a Super Bowl contending team. And especially the Dan Snyder days that you guys had, those are, I ain't gonna lie, those are some rough days.
Oh,
So,
they were horrendous. I mean,
yeah,
come on. I mean, the Albert Hainsworth signing and then the
yeah,
Josh Norman signing. I mean, look, man, I mean, 20 plus years of dealing with incompetence and turmoil all that time, man. It was hell. It was hell. As Champ always says, it's uglier than a masterpiece sneaker. So that's how bad Washington was during that time.
yeah, facts. What about you, World Champ? What do you think about the Commanders making the NFC Championship this year?
Oh man, it's amazing, man. People don't understand how historic this is. Because the thing is this, going back to the 70s and the 60s and all of that, the Commanders, when they were by another name, I will say, they were a historic franchise. They were one of the few franchises that you see that you saw on TV when there wasn't a lot of NFL franchises on television. You know, as you know, you're a Cowboys fan, so you saw the Commanders, you saw the Cowboys, you saw the Steelers, and you might have saw the Philadelphia Eagles every now and again, but back in the day, it was just those three teams, the Commanders, the Cowboys, and the Steelers. Those were the main teams that came on to the television. So that is a historic franchise, not to mention all of the history that they have. And to have Doug Williams in an executive position, seeing the maturation process of another African American quarterback that could potentially go to another Super Bowl and potentially win it. This is not one of these run of the mill teams that well, they ain't got a chance. They just happen to be here. No, they legitimately have a chance. Not to mention, Dan Quinn's been to a Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
He went there with my Atlanta Falcons years ago. Granted, he didn't win. We all know the 28-3. We all know that debacle, but he went and he nearly won. So Dan Quinn knows what he's doing. Not to mention Cliff Kingsbury, as PSP stated earlier. But so yeah, that is amazing, and especially when you think about how much less that Jaden Daniels has when it comes to that team. When you think about rookies going to the NFC Championship or the AFC Championship for that matter, you think about those defenses that they had. When you think about Ben Roethlisberger, when you think about Sean King and the 99 Bucks, when you think about Joe Flacco, when you think about Mark Sanchez, when you think about those guys, they wasn't really the focus of that team. When you think about them, you think about more of their defense and their running games more so than you think about them. But when you think about this team right here, even when you think about the Denver Broncos, you think about, although Bo Nix was good, you think about that defense. I mean, that defense had 63 sacks on the year. So when you think about this particular team right here in the rookie year that Jaden Daniels had, he has been the X factor for this team. It's historic. And look, I've said it before. I said it on PSP's pod. I said it on my TikTok channel. If he is to make the Super Bowl this year, it's going to set a whole nother standard for quarterbacks. We may even have a situation to where NFL contracts are rewritten. Remember when Derrick Rose won his MVP during his early years, they was able to rewrite the record books and rewrite contracts. Before then, you only had bird rights and you had Magic rights. Mm-hmm. That's the only rights that you had. And you had Russell rights. After Derrick Rose won the MVP and made the All-Star team, then you had Rose rights. So we very well could see some alterations in contracts with the NFL Players Association if he's able to go to a Super Bowl and potentially win it. We could see some Daniels rights in there. Anything could happen.
Yeah, I like the points that both of you guys said because, for my opinion, it is. I mean, if you ask me in September, would the Commanders get all the way to this point? I think all three of us would be on the same page. Like, I don't think they're there yet, based off of the team they had and Jaden Daniels being a rookie. But Jaden Daniels has helped turn this franchise around for the better, and that goes with having a good quarterback, a good head coach, and having the good ownership to go for it. And all three of them are new to this franchise, and getting to the NFC Championship already in their first year together, it's pretty special. So I got to say, as a Cowboys fan, it kind of hurts to see because we're the only team in the NFC since the 21st century began, and we have yet to make an NFC Championship appearance. But even watching this Commanders team, the Jaden Daniels, I think he's having one of the best rookie seasons, if not the greatest rookie season in NFL history, the way he's done it. Put this team on his back. He's won several games where he's had several game-winning drives. He's helped the Commanders go 12-5, but the Eagles weren't good enough, weren't as good. That's good enough to win this NFC East division. And plus, he's won 2 road games this year, or road playoff games against the Bucs and the Lions. Those were 2 tough games to win. So despite not having the most stacked roster compared to what maybe the Eagles still have, still being in the NFC Championship, or the Chiefs, I got to give them a lot of credit because, like PSP said, they still got a lot of cap money to play with this offseason, get even better, and go for positions that they're in need of. But the fact with this roster not being a stacked roster and the way that they've done it, I got to say it's been one of the most impressive playoff runs I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, man. I mean, and it's only going to get even better because, again, now Washington, who knows? They may move back to RFK Stadium in DC. Plus, you even hearing Devontae Adams. Could he? I mean, he said he would love to play with Jaden Daniels. You could imagine him and Terry McLaurin actually going there. Not only that, Washington is now becoming an attractive commodity because now with Josh Harris, now with Magic Johnson, now with a lot of people who are in the organization. I think the problem with Snyder was that he was too hands-on. And because of that, that's what turned the product where it is. This is no longer Washington one season, fluke. No, now that we have a legit quarterback, that is our best investment. So we have to do our part to make sure we protect him, get him O-line. And I just think it's only going to get better. And plus, we didn't even win the division. That's the beauty of it, because when is it that a team in that division won it back-to-back years? You got to go back to the Eagles in the early 2000s when Andy Reid. Yeah. So there's a chance that Washington could win the division next year. Plus, unfortunately, Thomas, I mean, I know you're a Cowboys fan, but Jerry Jones, the problem with him is he won't stay out the way.
Yes, I 100% agree on that. And I seen you guys' video chop it up about that. That's the thing. Like, Jerry Jones is like, he's that owner that won't let go. That's why I feel like with us having a head coaching vacancy, that should be a place where people want to die to coach there. But the way how Jerry Jones runs the team and wants to be hands-on, wants to control the team and be in the media 24/7, it's like, who even wants to coach there? What players even want to play there? That's why we can't attract any free agents at all anyway. But I 100% agree with you. Jerry Jones is like the problem of where the Cowboys are. You can hire whoever you want to, but it all starts in the front office of why we're at the position that we're in right now.
Yeah. And I think with Jerry, the biggest problem with Jerry is that he won't stay out the way. And I've heard reports that of him and Deion Sanders, now even Pete Carroll to Dallas. And my thing is, unfortunately, Jerry's just doing this just to get attention. Mm-hmm. I believe he's just doing it just to get attention because, after all, it is the Dallas Cowboys. They are America's team. But the thing is Jerry actually going to sit back and allow people to do the job? And that answer is no. Thomas, I wouldn't be surprised nor shocked at all if he hired Brandon Staley as a head coach, a coach that cannot have a leg to stand on. He brought in Mike McCarthy. Even though he's a Super Bowl champion head coach, he brought him over to the crib for beer and nachos.
Yeah, you ain't lying. And it's the thing too. It is true because what the direction, whoever we get, what Schottenheimer is the lead candidate right now. It's just going to be somebody that shouldn't be coaching this team. That if you turn it around, does have potential. It's like he wants somebody that's a puppet. I feel like that's how he used Mike McCarthy, somebody that might have a good looking resume, but not a guy that's known for standing up to his team and for the locker room to be an advocate leader. And I feel like that's why he let Jason Garrett stay there for so long. But things like that, it does suck at times, or most of the time being a Cowboys fan. So I will say that. World Champ, what you think about that?
Hey, I'm or out of the snake pit as well, PSP. Speaking of Schottenheimer, that's Marty Schottenheimer's son, by the way. Marty Schottenheimer, because I remember when the Washington Commanders hired Marty Schottenheimer. I remember when they hired Marty Schottenheimer. My bad.
8-8.
He went 8-8. Marty Schottenheimer was a hell of a coach. They fired him the very next year, and when they got Steve Spurrier. That was ugly. So it all starts with up top, and then it trickles its way down. And look, for Magic Johnson to be, and let that be a lesson to any and every NFL owner. Magic Johnson, our parents grew up with Magic Johnson. And then we got a chance to see him here and there with the Lakers and things of that nature as we was growing up. But he is a mythical figure. He is a figurehead like no other. When you got a Magic Johnson at the head of your business, that is something special. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about when you think about what he's done with the Starbucks, what he's done with the inner city projects, not to mention, his portfolio with scale, with all of that. When you put Magic's face on something, it automatically sells. For him to be able to say, and this is a guy that we all know that throughout his career, his playing career, I would say, his playing career, he loved the spotlight. For him to say, you have to step back, that should see a clear-cut message to any and every owner. Because look what he's done with the Dodgers. Look what he's done with his soccer team. Look what he did with the LA Sparks. All up under his watch. All of them won. The LA Sparks was a dynasty with Lisa Leslie.
Mm-hmm.
He was the MVP. So, yeah. So that should be a lesson to every owner. If Magic Johnson, the most entertaining basketball player that we've ever seen, and the one with a lot of bravado and everything, if he can say, hey, you got to step back and let people do their jobs. If he can say that, then there should be a clear-cut sign to a lot of owners to say, hey, maybe we need to do the same and stop trying to be the team. And the problem that I've said with Jerry, and I've said this to plenty of people, Jerry wants to be the NFC version of Al Davis. Way too bad. He wants to be Al Davis. It's just like you saw what happened. And what's so funny about that, you saw what happens with Al Davis, God rest his soul, with that team as time went along. They went down and down and down and down. And eventually, he wasn't even hiring people outside, much like Jerry's doing right now. He's not hiring people who are outside of that quote-unquote cowboy club that he can just basically, puppetize at a certain point. It's all about him. And that has to change. Now, I know you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but guess what? You fall a couple times and break your hip. Guess what? You're going to learn if you don't learn after that third time, next time could be your whole leg. So that's what Jerry has to learn at a certain point. But I'm glad that this Commanders ownership, and it shouldn't have been a doubt, but I know people had their doubts because, Magic and Josh Harris, they were quote unquote basketball and baseball guys. But the thing is, if you're winning everywhere you go, that's a clear-cut sign that you know what you're doing.
Right. And also with Dallas and Champ and I, we've talked about it numerous times. It even got to a point when Stephen Jones talked Jerry out of drafting Johnny Manziel.
I remember that. It was pretty wild. And I remember that day clear as that. I thought that pick that night was going to be Johnny Manziel, but it ended up being Zach Martin. But things like that, you knew a declining Romo, and that was before that, the 2014, 2015 year where the Dez should have caught it. That was when Romo constantly went 8-8 3 years in a row, and you still weren't considering a change at quarterback. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you guys. I'm not saying it in a disrespectful way, but I just feel like once Jerry is no longer around, the team will finally be good again. If his son doesn't take over.
Well, the thing is, like father, like son. So you hope that Stephen Jones doesn't replicate the same type of habits as Jerry. But the thing is with Jerry, if you really want to win, you're going to have to make a sacrifice. And I don't see Jerry at this point in time making a sacrifice. All this talk about Prime, I just don't see Prime going to Dallas. Yeah, he wouldn't mind it. He loves Dallas. Dallas is a great place to be. No state income taxes. I mean, again, Cowboys allure. Used to play there, won Super Bowls there. But the thing is, Jerry, are you going to allow somebody to do the job? No. That's the thing. Jerry is just too hands-on. Jerry does radio shows. Jerry also does press conferences. He's the first one to be on the press conference. Not the quarterback, not the wide receiver, not the head coach. It's Jerry. And at the end of the day, the reason why Jerry loves having these discussions about Prime or any other head coach coming to the Cowboys, because at the end of the day, it's talking about him and the Cowboys. Because they're still America's team. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, they're still America's team. They're still the most glamorous team, not just in football, but in all sports. They're worth, $6-8 billion? So they're worth a ton of money. So they ain't going nowhere. So, and plus the market, the merchandise, and they're going to have performances. So I think for Jerry, no matter what, this is where Jerry's going to be until someone else takes over ownership. And I just think that Cowboy fans just have to accept it or come to that conclusion. And Mike McCarthy, I give him a lot of credit for his time in Dallas. I've said before he was a product of Favre and Rodgers because I've questioned his leadership, I've questioned his clock management, I've questioned a lot of things about him. But I'm actually glad that he reached the point where, you know what, I can go elsewhere. Hopefully for Dallas, they need to address the running game. They should definitely get a running back because last year in free agency, you missed Derrick Henry. Okay, you missed out on the draft in Blake Corum. This is a good opportunity for you to land a running back because Dak is coming off a hamstring injury. And even though Dak signed a big contract, who knows what he has left in the tank? Then you got to address Micah Parsons because he's going to want his money.
Facts. Yep.
So there are a lot of things that you got to address if you're Dallas. And who's going to be calling the plays on offense? You got to get yourself a good offensive mind to help out Dak Prescott for the next few years. So if you look at it, who's the best one out there? I mean, because the Cowboys, they could have looked at getting a head coach. They could have looked at Aaron Glenn. Unfortunately, he decided to go to New York. Ben Johnson decided to go to Chicago. So, Jerry, you're going to have to do your due diligence. You're going to have to find somebody that's out there. But it can't just be people that you like. It has to be something that's conducive for the organization and the team. Otherwise, you're setting yourself back.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that's what should happen. But like you said, it is true. He's going to go for the guys that he's comfortable with, continue to do what he likes to do, going on radio shows, soaking in the spotlight with social media and for the media. It's just unfortunate. And it's frustrating and aggravating as a fan because, the rosters that we had over the last few years, at least an NFC championship game at worst, with the stacked rosters. And
they should have went to the NFC championship game last year.
Yes. Yep.
Given the circumstances that they had last year, you finished with the number 2 seed in the NFC. Dak Prescott, statistically, that was his best year of his career, considering the year before he and Davis Mills were tied for the most in interceptions. I think he was the runner-up for MVP behind, of course, Lamar.
Yeah.
And to lose in that game against Green Bay, to say that would be devastating would not do justice. Considering that team, they were dominant at home. Didn't lose a game at home during that season. And to lose like that in that type of fashion, it's demoralizing. And how do you bounce back from that? You re-signed Dak, you re-signed CD. Now you got to address the offensive line. Ty Smith is gone now. Zach Martin's on his last leg, so you got to address the offensive line. Champ will be the first to tell you quarterback can't throw behind his back. So without that offensive line, how's it going to help out with Dak Prescott? So Dallas, you're going to have to figure out a head coach. I mean, if you're Dallas, I don't see Jerry doing it, but I wouldn't mind having a Mike Tomlin as my coach.
I would take that in a heartbeat. I honestly would take that. I would see what kind of picks would you have to give up to get Mike Tomlin. I would do that in a heartbeat. What do you think about that world champ, Mike Tomlin to the Cowboys? Would that be a good idea?
Yes, that would be one hell of an idea. That will show the fans that you're serious about what you're doing. Show them that you're serious about what you're doing. Number one. That way, if the product on the field is not where it's supposed to be, they can't blame the front office. Much like the Atlanta Falcons did this year. Like in the offseason, Terry Fontenot was out there clicking. But, unfortunately, it didn't translate to on the field on the second half of the season. I think that would be one heck of an idea. I think that would be an epic change of scenery for Mike Tomlin. I think it will be an act of betrayal by the Steelers, for him to go to the Cowboys of all people. But I think that would be something special. Another thing that they might want to consider doing, although they've locked him up and they've already gave him a new contract, you might want to get on the phone and talk to Cleveland about Kevin Stefanski. You might want to get on the phone and talk to him. And look,
Lord.
Yeah.
Cleveland with Deshaun Watson at this point.
Yeah, if I'm Kevin Stefanski, I'm doing everything I can to get out the get out the shopping mall, if you get what I'm saying. But yeah. But I will say this. Let's hope that once Jerry either steps back or has no choice but to get out of the way, let's hope Stephen Jones don't follow the trends of a lot of owners as kids. That being Jeannie Buss of my Los Angeles Lakers or Mark Davis of the Las Vegas Raiders. Let's hope he don't follow in their footsteps.
Yeah.
Because they're already in trouble now as far as not being able to get. When the last time in my lifetime, just me, I'm 37. I've seen the Cowboys get some of the biggest free agents that you've ever want to see. I saw them get Eddie George. I saw them get T.O. I saw them get Keyshawn Johnson, Terry Glenn. I saw them get Deion Sanders. I saw them get Rocket Ismail. They ain't got that big free agent signing that they're just craving. I haven't seen that in a while.
Nope, not a long time. And I feel like the last big trade we made to shake things up was that Amari Cooper trade back in 2018, 2019. That was the last time I seen a big trade in Dallas happen to make the team better.
I think Jerry at this point, he just wants to go with the younger players in the draft because with the older players, they have leverage compared to the players coming out of the draft, and they're probably going to ask for money. And Jerry's willing to hold on to the younger players. I just think for Jerry, the bottom line is, man, what do you want? You want to win a Super Bowl, but Jerry's what? How old is Jerry? He's in his 80s, right?
82, I think. 81, okay. 82.
All right, 81, 82. So chances are you probably don't have that much time left. So you better figure out a plan on what you're going to do. Are you going to hand the organization? It seems like, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he handed the organization to his son, obviously. I wouldn't blame him because ain't nothing wrong with nepotism. And you want to trust somebody to hold on to your investment. But Jerry, you got to figure out what you want to do. And I told a lot of Cowboys fans, man, you're not getting a Bill Belichick. You're not getting a Jim Harbaugh unless Jerry stays out the way. No head coach with respect and accomplishments doesn't like to be told what to do, and certainly doesn't want anyone telling them how to operate. So Jerry, I just don't see Jerry sitting back. And the worst thing that ever happened to the Dallas Cowboys when he fired Jimmy Johnson and won the Super Bowl with Barry Switzer, that gave Jerry Jones the validation. I don't need a great head coach. I don't need a great GM. I don't need to do things the traditional way. I'm going to do it my way. It's been 30 years. And this is and how many playoff games have the Dallas Cowboys won since that Super Bowl in 95? I think 4 playoff.
Yep.
4 playoff games. And you still haven't even been to a conference championship game. And you've had great opportunities, numerous opportunities to at least get to one and failed to do that. I think that was the worst thing that ever happened to Cowboys history, because when you fired Jimmy Johnson, who was great at the University of Miami, great for the Dallas Cowboys, held players accountable, but also players loved him. Once you decided to kick him out the door and replace him with somebody else, that gave Jerry the reason, I don't need to do things the traditional way. I want to do it my way. And he wants to be like Al Davis, as Champ put it. Not every way is the same way. Same thing with wrestling. Champ and I, we talk about Vince Russo a lot. Yes, Vince Russo did get ahead with the times with the Attitude Era. But when he tried that at WCW, how did that turn out?
Not so good.
That's nasty.
It was nasty. Nastier than chitlins and pig's feet. Okay. And you had the talent around you in the World Wrestling Federation in the Attitude Era. Of course, obviously, you had The Rock, Austin, you had Taker, you had Mankind. And yeah, I give Vince Russo a lot of credit for getting ahead with the times, But when you tried to do that in WCW, it didn't turn out so well for you. You try doing things your way. Sometimes as you get older, you got to evolve. You just got to get ahead with the times. And unfortunately, Jerry hasn't.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. But yeah, when y'all think about football late at night and you put your head on your pillow, just think about Thomas and the hard times I got to go through as a Cowboys fan sometimes, you know.
Prayer.
But yeah, it's rough. But we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next segment. So we're gonna be talking about our new school versus old school quarterback matchups. So what I put together was the 2010s quarterback matchups compared to the modern day quarterbacks. So I put together the greatest 2010 quarterbacks. Just some from that list, like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees. Matching them up against modern day quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. So first matchup I have for you guys, who would you guys take in the prime? Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes?
Whew.
The GOAT. The GOAT. Undoubtedly. My thing is this. People love recency bias. We love seeing what's in front of us right now. But the thing is, look, outside of Troy Brown, Tommy didn't have a perennial Pro Bowler at the wide receiver position until Randy Moss. He didn't have a perennial Pro Bowler until Corey Dillon, clock killing Dillon. And that was on that last Super Bowl in 2004. Before that dynasty went to bed and he was able to recreate a new one. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of guys who are not necessarily Hall of Famers that Brady made great. David Patton, David Givens, Troy Brown, Deion Branch, Julian Edelman. I know the only reason we hear Julian Edelman's name a little bit more now because he was in the social media era. When you think about those receivers that he had in the early days, you think about Deion Branch, who was great in his own right, but as far as he didn't have a Tyreek Hill, he didn't have a Travis Kelce early on, and he still managed to win. Granted, people say, well, the defense. Hey, Patrick Mahomes has a defense as well. Has a great defense. But when you think about the skill position players that Tom Brady had early on in his career, not to mention the combination between him and Gronk that he was able to create with Gronk missing a lot of time. And then him going to another place and proving it was me all along. Got to go with the GOAT, man. I understand the kid is always going to raise eyebrows, but until, the GOAT is overtaken either in rings, because that's why we remember him as the GOAT. We don't remember him GOATs because of stats or MVPs. We remember him because of rings. So I have to go with the GOAT, man. Peak for peak, I got to go with the GOAT, man, because he didn't have one Hall of Fame career. He had 3 Hall of Fame careers.
You can't go wrong with going with Brady, but you can't also go wrong with going with Mahomes either. It's really more difficult than people actually give credit to. People think it is. First of all, I don't think Patrick Mahomes needs to win 7 Super Bowls to be considered the GOAT. Because look at basketball. LeBron James is 4-6. A lot of people consider him the GOAT above Michael Jordan. I think for Patrick Mahomes, yes, it certainly helps when you have a Hall of Fame tight end in Travis Kelce. No doubt about it, a great wide receiver in Tyreek Hill, and a brilliant offensive mastermind like Andy Reid. And in fairness to Andy Reid, he did went to 5 NFC championship games with the Philadelphia Eagles and went to a Super Bowl. But here's the thing. He didn't win one until he had that quarterback. And he's worked with a lot of good ones. Donovan McNabb, they booed him on draft day. Michael Vick, 2010, still pains me to this day. Greatest year I ever saw Michael Vick throwing the football, greatest performance I ever saw Monday night was against Washington, ESPN. You look at what he had, Patrick Mahomes' predecessor in Kansas City, Alex Smith, 7 consecutive AFC Championship appearances. You think of Patrick Mahomes. I'm just reading the numbers right here. In 19 games in his career in the playoffs, he has a 105.6 passer rating with 5,312 yards, 42 touchdown passes to only 8 interceptions. In 2022, he became, without Tyreek Hill, he had to do this. Yes, he had Travis Kelce, but he also had Juju Smith-Schuster. He also had Marquez Valdes-Scantling, McCole Hardman. He became the first since Kurt Warner to lead the NFL in passing yards and passing touchdowns, as well as winning the MVP, Super Bowl MVP. Kurt Warner didn't do that until 1999. You look at what Mahomes is doing inside the pocket, outside the pocket, the improvisational skills, the baseball background that he has, how he has elevated that city and organization. He still has something that Tom Brady hasn't done. He has the opportunity to three-peat, which could move up for him. Yes, people can diminish it and poo-poo it because Champ and I, we've talked about this before. Yes, the refs, I will say this, the refs have actually helped out the Kansas City Chiefs. Go look at the game against Texas. Horrible officiating, to which the great Troy Aikman called out on it. But outside of that, you look at what Patrick Mahomes has done, and mind you, he's even had to do it in worse circumstances without Tyreek Hill, even with Travis Kelce regressing, even with the circumstances, he still finds a way to get the job done. Do you know how great it is? Last year, that was his first time in the playoffs on the road. First time on the road. And to beat Josh Allen at Josh Allen's place, to beat Lamar Jackson at Josh Allen's place. The Super Bowl, he didn't play well in the first half, and in the second half, he did struggle with the pick. But still in all, Patrick Mahomes still found ways to win that game. Even in the Super Bowl in which they lost to at Tampa, it wasn't because of Mahomes. As Champ always said, quarterback can't throw behind his back.
No.
Their two offensive linemen, Andrew Schwartz and I think Eric Fisher, they were gone. They couldn't play. And Patrick Mahomes literally had to run for his life. So it goes to, and he was still making throws like, wow. So if you want to still make the argument for Brady, I'm cool with that because we've seen Brady go elsewhere and win a Super Bowl. And I think that's the bigger test Patrick Mahomes needs to do. He needs to show, okay, I can win a Super Bowl without Andy Reid. But Andy Reid, yes, you've been to NFC Championship games, you've been to a Super Bowl, but you didn't start winning Super Bowls. You didn't start being in that GOAT conversation until you had number 15 at quarterback, who, by the way, you traded up in the draft to take him with the 10th overall pick. You had an opportunity at that time to take Deshaun Watson out of Clemson after going to back-to-back national championships, including that last national championship appearance in which he beat Alabama. And you rolled the dice with Mahomes, and to get you this far, and the beauty of it, he's only 29 years old. So he's got another 10, 11 years left in the tank. And just like Brady, he doesn't mind taking team-friendly discounts because we know how much money he makes off the football field. He's all about rings and dynasties. And he's done it with the circumstances, with the family situations, everything else. It seems like the moment is never too big with Patrick Mahomes. I got no problem with people picking Tom Brady over Patrick Mahomes, but I wouldn't be mad if you go with Mahomes over Tom Brady because I don't think we've ever seen this type of greatness for 7 years as a starter. And the thing is, he's only 29 years old, and he's got another 10, 11 years left in the tank as long as he could stay healthy. So.
Yeah, I like both the points you guys made. I already think Patrick Mahomes is top 3 all time. based off of what I've seen at the quarterback position, what he's already done this early in his career. But I'll go with Tom Brady here. I honestly feel like Tom Brady is the greatest football player to ever put on a pair of pads. I mean, that's how special number 12 was. And the fact that he had 7 Super Bowl rings, that's more than any other NFL franchise in NFL history. So the fact that he can say he has more rings than any franchise is wild to me. But the things that he did with the Patriots, I got to say, like World Champ said, he's got 3 Hall of Fame careers of 1. And the fact that he elevated wide receivers like Julian Edelman to be special on the field. Chris Hogan is another guy, too, an ex-lacrosse player that he elevated to be a threat out on the wide receiver position. Wes Welker is another one, too. He was a pretty good player, but Tom Brady, I feel like, established him. The fact that he did that his entire career, longevity matters, and he's played until like his nearly late 40s. I feel like his decision making, his football IQ, the clutch performances, having one of the greatest comebacks in sports history, being down 28-3 in that Super Bowl against the Falcons. My fault, World Champ. But but those things like that, I just feel like make you the GOAT. And the things that he had to overcome in his career too. And then like World Champ's point, you going from, okay, you don't want me in New England no more. I'm gonna go to Tampa Bay and do it in 1 year and elevate an entire franchise and bring them back to another Super Bowl. So I gotta say, with all the performances, all the moments, Brady has him now. But to at PSP's point, Mahomes ain't gonna be that far behind, because if he does something of a three-peat, something that's never been done in NFL history, to be the first one to do it and have 4 rings, you're already so close behind Brady. That would give him 4 compared to Brady's 7. So I think this conversation is going to pick up especially more this offseason if the Chiefs do three-peat. But for now, I'll say Brady, but I do believe Mahomes is a special guy, and I got him top 3 with Tom Brady, Joe Montana. He's up there with those guys already. So the next quarterbacks, I got Aaron Rodgers. Who you taking in your prime, Aaron Rodgers or Lamar Jackson?
Oh, dang. Oh,
I know I made it a little tough.
Oh man.
I'll go with Aaron. I'll go with Aaron because I think, and I love Lamar, and I think Lamar is terrific. But I think with Aaron, other than Mahomes, I think he's the greatest passer I've ever seen. There's him, Mahomes, Dan Marino. The way Aaron Rodgers can throw the football inside and outside the pocket, I'm sorry, is just second to none. How the way he only 4 seasons of double-digit interceptions. 4. And it's not like 15, 16, 18 interception. He does it so efficient. He has been a back-to-back MVP. Even though he has struggled in the playoffs, just like Lamar, he does have a Super Bowl ring. He does have a Super Bowl MVP. Plus, also the expectations, I think, were higher for him as opposed to Lamar, because you had to sat for 3 years behind a Hall of Fame quarterback in Brett Favre. And Green Bay, title town. And for him to deliver that Super Bowl in 2010 and to be even better than Favre, I think that puts the nail in the coffin, because he's a better passer than Favre is. Inside, outside the pocket, I think Favre is a better athlete. I think Favre has a slightly stronger arm, but the efficiency in the way Rodgers does it and how he could throw the football to different targets, from Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Jermichael Finley, Devontae Adams, a lot of other targets. Only knock I've ever had with Aaron Rodgers was his attitude, his leadership. But other than that, as just a football player, I mean, the way he could throw the football, and he is mobile too. He's no Lamar Jackson as an athlete, but he is mobile. So I think because of the accomplishments, the way he throws the football, and Lamar, to his credit, he has gotten so much better every year as a passer. I would go with Rodgers.
You know what? I'm going to take Rodgers as well. I have to take that. Piggyback on what PSP stated, man, the prettiest ball you ever want to see. And He had the quickest release outside of Dan Marino that you ever want to see. A very quick release. That's how come he was able to avoid a lot of those sacks. And he was pretty good on the run. And he was one of the best quarterbacks on the run as well. Granted, you would never mistake him for Lamar Jackson or Randall Cunningham. He was great on the run. And, got to give him credit, like PSP said. When you are in Green Bay, you are expected, when you become a starting quarterback, to win the Super Bowl. That's probably why you see a lot of the criticisms that so Jordan Love at this point, because you're going to be compared to Bart Starr. You're going to be compared to Brett Favre. You're going to be compared to Aaron Rodgers. Those guys won Super Bowls. And to be fair, Green Bay is one of the most quarterback-rich franchise in the world. I mean, Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer, and even the guys between those Hall of Famers, they was pretty good. When you think about Lynn Dickey and Don Mikowski. So I will go Aaron Rodgers, man. And at Aaron Rodgers' peak, there was no one more efficient. There was no one more dangerous. And, outside of his playoff failures in the NFC Championship, in the playoffs, he was pretty dangerous. And if you don't believe that, ask my Atlanta Falcons back in 2011 when he won that on his way to that Super Bowl. So he was out there throwing darts on that field. And we had a darn good defense out there, too. So I got to go with Aaron Rodgers on that, man. Rodgers is good. Lamar's still growing, and I think he's going to make history with his own right, especially if Todd Monken stays there. Shout out to the Georgia Bulldogs. But if Todd Monken stays there, we're going to see a lot of great other things in that organization.
Yeah, this one was tough to me, but I'll go Rodgers too. Prime Aaron Rodgers was nasty though. I mean, from the days of him playing in Green Bay, a healthy Rodgers was unstoppable. I mean, PSP, I agree with you. I think he has one of, if not the greatest arm I've ever seen at the quarterback position, based off how precise he would throw the ball in tight windows, based on how he would just be so comfortable in the pocket throwing the ball. I mean, he wasn't the world champ, like you said. He wasn't the most mobile guy when you think of a dual threat quarterback like Lamar, Randall Cunningham, or Michael Vick, etc. The man was pretty effective though when he had to make plays with his legs though, and he looked like a fly guy doing it. I mean, from the standpoint of him being a four-time MVP, he should have more than one ring, but he was a clutch performer in the regular season and in the playoffs. And I remember so many times watching the Cowboys over the years, I would dread playing the Packers because number 12 was behind center, and that man was a Cowboys killer. I mean, the Aaron Rodgers, I would say also, I put him top 5 all time too. And I think he was better than Favre. But again, like you guys said, it came with a lot of pressure with him having to learn under Brett Favre and sit for underneath him for a couple of years out in Green Bay, which I think helped mold him into the player that he became. But I would take Prime Rodgers over Lamar Jackson that we see now. But I think Lamar Jackson does have a chance to rewrite his own history and become one of those players that did it on his own and eventually will win a Super Bowl based on not having to change his style of play.
I think he does have a great chance of winning a Super Bowl. To add on to Aaron Rodgers, I think a lot of it also because the chip on his shoulder, because wasn't he projected to be the number 1 overall pick in that 05 draft, but it ended up going to Alex Smith out of Utah. So yeah. I think that kind of gave Aaron Rodgers the motivation. And also, too, Thomas, I know you're a Cowboys fan. If you want to look at a throw from Aaron Rodgers, go look at the divisional round at Dallas. The throw to Jared Cook, rolling to his left. Like, how many people, other than Mahomes and Josh Allen, or people from the 80s, 90s, 70s, how do you know too many people who can make that type of throw?
No. I can't even think of an all-time great that can make that throw. And especially now that you brought that up, I swear I heard the reports that everybody in the huddle with the few seconds left that were in that game, that was just like a sandbox play, something you do in backyard football. They just drew that up right at the line of scrimmage, and it worked to perfection because they wanted to kick the game with a field goal. But I agree with you 100%. Not your average quarterback or a lot of all-time greats are making that tight throw in the pocket, especially right on the lines of the sideline to Cook in that game.
Hey, Aaron Rodgers was that deal, man. I mean, anytime that you could just, like I said, when you are no longer a circle win on anybody's calendar and people are fearing you, and people feared Aaron Rodgers, especially when he had Randall Cobb and those guys like that. When he had those guys, he was loaded, especially during that 15-1 season.
Oh, yeah.
He was on fire. He was on fire.
Yeah. Aaron Rodgers was special. And that is another player that I wish at least seen get 2 to 3 instead of, because I don't think he's going to win another Super Bowl. He might be done nowadays, but they're definitely a special player. Next two quarterbacks are pretty good too. Who are you guys taking in their prime? Peyton Manning or Josh Allen?
Peyton.
Hey,
I love Josh Allen because obviously his athleticism, his arm strength, but at the same time though, I got to give it to Peyton because he's had back-to-back MVPs. He has won 5. I mean, in my opinion, other than Aaron Rodgers, the greatest regular season quarterback. I mean, how he's able to work with other wide receivers and talent and to make them better. I mean, Peyton, look at his forehead. I mean, that's how big it is when it comes to his brain. That's how knowledgeable he is with football in terms of reading the defenses and picking them apart. And for him to go elsewhere in Denver after like what 4 neck surgeries and to be able to win a Super Bowl there. And in 2013, even having a better year than what he had in 2004. I think he had the most passing yards and touchdowns. 55 touchdowns, so only 10 interceptions that year. And he had Julius and Demaryius Thomas, God rest his soul. And that offense was just number one. And so I think with a guy like Peyton, just the mind, the knowledge. Peyton didn't have the strongest arm in the world, but he had a lot more velocity. And I just think of the expectations that came with it with Peyton. I go with Peyton. So based on accomplishments, the stats, the career, everything else, I go with Peyton for now.
I gotta go the same. Peyton. Look, I am old enough to remember this. I remember when 3,000 yards used to be a great year. If you kind of threw for 4,000 yards, that's because you was really coming from behind a few games and your team was often on losing ends of the spectrum. But up until Peyton Manning, 3,000 yards was considered a good season. You had a good season if you threw for 3,000 yards. Once Peyton came to the NFL, 4,000 yards was the bare minimum. And when you set a standard like that, like I said, 4,000 yards was good, but he made it the standard. I mean, 4,000. I mean, I remember when if a quarterback had a 4,000 yard season back in like the 80s and the 90s, you automatically went MVP caliber years. But when Peyton came into the league, that became the standard. Nowadays, if a quarterback don't throw for at least nowadays 3,000 yards is considered a down year for a lot of guys. If you don't throw for at least 4,000, you slip it. So for him to set that standard, especially with that team, with the Indianapolis Colts, that was something special. And not to mention, man, some of the audibles that he used to call, the things that he made calling audibles cool.
Omaha.
I mean, and I would have, me being a former offensive line, I would have hated to have played with Peyton Manning because it was like, man, please hike this darn ball so I get up out this stands because that would have been so annoying. But the way he was able to lift the franchise up that had not had a lot of success, that had went through a plethora of bad quarterbacks. When you talk about Jeff George, not to mention, a lot of other run-of-the-mill quarterbacks, when you think about Sean Salisbury was a part of that franchise at one point. He was terrible. Art Schlichter, outside of the Johnny Unitas years with the Colts, where they were the Baltimore Colts, him and Burt Jones, they really didn't have a lot to celebrate in the 80s, in the early 90s, up until Peyton. And for you to come to that franchise and deliver them something that they hadn't seen since they were at Baltimore, that was special. But like I said, Peyton, they can say whatever they want to about Peyton in the playoffs or what have you. He got 2 Super Bowls. You know, you got 2 Super Bowl rings. You rewrote the record books and set a new standard. People never thought that Dan Marino's record was going to be broken. Peyton Manning broke it twice over. And when you can bring the best, and when people say he played with superstar receivers, that wasn't always the case. Remember, he played with Austin Collie and Jacob Tabby. I didn't even know who those guys were when they first came out. I never heard of it. Then Donald Brown, you know, when Joseph Adai and Andrew James left, when they got him out of Connecticut, you know,
he made a lot of other guys better. And
yes.
on top of that, Josh Allen, his first 2 years, sorry to steal your thunder, champ. His first 2 years as a passer wasn't that good until he had Stephon Diggs.
Yes. And so Peyton was able to win MVPs and win division. He owned the AFC South. He owned the AFC South. Even with Steve McNair in that division, he owned the AFC South. So for you to own a division, and the AFC South wasn't a bad division. You had him, you had Steve McNair, and you had Mark Brunell in that same division. And when Mark Brunell went out, Byron Leftwich was a Pro Bowler. Not to mention, after he left, David Garrard was a Pro Bowler. So the AFC South was not a bad division. It was a blood and guts division. In fact, in 2003, it was at its peak. Both of the MVPs, the co-MVPs, came from the AFC South in Steve McNair and Peyton Manning. So for you to win that division and own it for almost a decade and a half, that's short of amazing. And you set a new standard. Like I said, 4,000 yards was considered magnificent back in the 80s and the 90s. Peyton made it the norm. You didn't throw for 4,000 yards this year? Fooey. You know, that was the knock on Lamar Jackson. He finally got a 4,000 yard season. You know, 3,000 yards was considered the standard in the 90s. You know, Dan Marino, he had a couple 4,000 yard seasons, but we all know because the plan was Dan Marino, because they didn't have any defense or what have you. But for you to set that standard over the course of a decade and a half with a team that had not had anything since the 70s and Burt Jones and Johnny Unitas, they didn't have anything from the 70s all the way up to there. Because like I said, they drafted Jeff George, Art Schlichter, not to mention Sean Salisbury. So they didn't have anything. But you to take that franchise out of the pit of obscurity and become the face of the NFL, I got to take Peyton. Like I said, he redid the standard. The standard is now 4,000 yards or higher. If you ain't did 4,000 yards, people, unless you got 1,000, unless you do 3,000, 1,000 like a Lamar or something like that, or like a Josh Allen, nobody's trying to hear, you didn't throw for 4,000 yards this year. Okay, you did decent. You didn't do good.
And not just that, though. When Peyton Manning couldn't play in 2011 because of the neck injuries, they ended up having the #1 overall pick and going with Andrew Luck.
Yeah, that was bad. And it wasn't because they didn't have, and contrary to popular belief, it wasn't because they didn't have anything either. They had good defensive players on that team. But, you know, like their offensive coordinator said, I'll never forget him saying that. I'll never forget Tony Dungy used to ask the coordinator, he's in Tampa right now. I forget his name. He's in Tampa right now. But I'll never forget, he always used to ask the guys, why don't you let Jim Sorgi and any of the other guys take any reps? He said, he looked right at Tony Dungy and said, if Peyton's get hurt, we're messed up anyway. So that's like, I don't let them take any reps.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Peyton Manning here as well. They got some. When you think about it, though, Peyton Manning and Josh Allen got a lot of crazy comparisons because both had problems turning over the ball, and over time they both did fix their mechanics. I mean, Josh Allen's fixing his mechanics. He had his best touchdown interception in terms of that ratio this year in his career. But I would go with Peyton Manning here. I mean, he was a 5-time MVP. I mean, like you said, world champion. He made audible in at the line of scrimmage so cool and reading defenses so quick. And you see a guy like Dak Prescott has learned from that from some all-time greats like Peyton Manning and Drew Brees based off of that and reading defenses. So it's rare to see like the way how Peyton Manning read defenses and recognize defenses, play the game that he did at the quarterback position. I mean, the man had a great arm. He was a clutch performer. He's one of those guys that people could say he should have more than 2 rings, but a lot of people forget he had to play like a lot of top tier quarterbacks out in the AFC. There was Tom Brady at the time. Phillip Rivers wasn't too bad either. Ben Roethlisberger. There was a lot of contending teams out there in the AFC during Peyton Manning's prime days. But PSP, I like the point that you had, the days that he had with Denver Broncos offense. That was he orchestrated one of the greatest offenses in NFL history. I mean, Eric Decker, Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, Julius Thomas. That was an OP 2013 offense that was one of the all-time greats. But yeah, I'll go with Peyton Manning here. I think Josh Allen still has a lot of time to grow, and that's another guy I can see winning a Super Bowl or 2 before he hangs it up. Definitely one of the best today, but I would definitely go with Peyton Manning as well. So next 2 quarterbacks getting a little more dicey. Drew Brees or Joe Burrow?
Drew Brees. Drew Brees. I gotta give it to Drew. And that pains me as an Atlanta Falcons fan. That pains me. Funny story. I went to 3 Falcons games. All of them was when we played Drew Brees. We 0-3 every time I attend because of Drew Brees. I blame you for this. So when you talk about, look, we didn't start paying attention to completing percentage until Drew Brees. Let's just be honest. We didn't start thinking about completion percentage again outside of Kenny Anderson in the early 80s. Because that was the last time we ever really pretty much paid attention to completing percentage. Other than that, we paid attention to yards, touchdowns. That was it. When you are completing 76% of your passes, that's efficiency. The funny thing about it, he did it without Pro Bowl wide receivers up until he got Michael Thomas. Adam Michie, he's not a Pro Bowler. Marcus Colston, although good, not a Pro Bowler. Just that Joe Horn was on his last leg. Didn't have Dante Stallworth. The ultimate weapon that he had on offense was his running backs and his tight end and Jimmy Grant. So he did more with a heck of a lot less. And like I said, he was so efficient. You was never out of a game with Drew Brees. And look, he set standards much like Peyton Manning that you just can't do on the norm. 5,000 yards for 6 straight years. Up until him, we only seen that one time, 5,000 yards, and that was with Dan Marino. 5,000 yards passing, and he made it the norm. He made it so normalized that people didn't even know, and people just could not understand it. And he would dice you up like a can of tomatoes on that field with precision. It didn't always look pretty either. It wasn't always cute. It was just fundamentals going up and down the field, matriculating that ball down the field. And when you think about the way that he was able to do more with a lot less, the way that he was able to go 13-3 and make the playoff. And I think he made the NFC, and I think he almost made it to the NFC Championship that year. To do that with your defense in last place, that was spectacular. Not only that, much like Peyton Manning, played in one of the most quarterback-driven divisions of all time. When you think about that division in the 2000s, yes, you think about Drew Brees, but you also think about Matt Ryan, and you also think about Cam Newton. So you have right there between Matt Ryan and Drew Brees, you got 2 Hall of Famers, and between those 3, you have 2 out of 3 that were MVPs. So the NFC South was not one of these one-of-the-mill divisions. You had to compete. Not to mention, you had some of the greatest defensive players down there. Look at Luke Kuechly.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I got to give it to Drew Brees on this one, man. One of the most efficient, I'm not going to say one, the most efficient quarterback of all time. Like I said, we didn't really start paying attention to completing percentage until Drew Brees, in my humble opinion. Yes, we saw it with Kenny Anderson in the early 80s, but we didn't start really paying attention to it until Drew Brees, when he started throwing 69, 70%, 72%, 76% of it, completing that many percent. We started paying more attention to efficiency when Drew Brees came into his own. So I got to give it to Drew Brees. He set a new standard.
I go with Drew Brees as well because of the standards for all the things that Champ mentioned, but also too how he changed the culture. Look what he did for New Orleans. Champ hates them. At one point, they were called the Aints. They had the trash bags in their bag. And for him to deliver a Super Bowl to the city of New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, that says something. He revitalized that organization, that franchise, and that city. Plus, Drew Brees, when he went to New Orleans, he had that injury, the torn labrum injury. There were only two organizations that was willing to deal with him, the Dolphins and the Saints. He decided to go to New Orleans and to have this Hall of Fame career. Even though he had a solid career in San Diego, it was nothing compared to New Orleans as far as the numbers, the stats that he was putting up, though. So I give it to Drew Brees. But Joe Burrow, look, man, you cannot. Joe Burrow, I go with Drew Brees, but Joe Burrow, Cincinnati, you better hold on to him. And Jeb, you've told me this before. If they lose both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, I pull a Carson Palmer.
Yeah, you trade me tomorrow. Matter of fact, I'm not even showing up. I'm not even going past the McDonald's in order to get to the facility. You don't sign my guys. You don't sign T. Higgins. And T. Higgins already said I wanted to take a pay cut in order to stay here. So if I'm Joe Burrow, you don't sign them too. Like yesterday, and rumor has it that Kyle Pitts is willing to come there as well in order to team up with that offense. You don't do something this offseason in order to get me what I need in order to compete in this NFL, yeah, you might as well just trade me. And I know, look, there's a team in Minnesota right now, although they have a guy on the bench, although they have J.J. McCarthy, I guarantee you they will give up the form in order to be with it.
Do you imagine Joe Burrow in a Minnesota Vikings offense? That would be insane.
And he's reunited with his guy,
Justin Jefferson.
So,
yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Look, I this is a hot take. I would take Burrow over Brees. Now, Brees is an all-time great, but I think that's how bright of a window I think Joe Burrow's prime can really be. Because based off of what I've seen so far, him being clutch, him already getting the Bengals to a Super Bowl was just really a possession away from getting them their first Super Bowl in their franchise history a few years ago. And the way he's done it with bad offensive lines, and I've seen him do something that only Tom Brady has done, which is beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. So I know Joe Burrow can do it. I think based off of how his awareness has been in the pocket, his arm strength, even though he has been blessed to play with guys like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and like you said, world champ, Drew Brees really didn't have a true number one until Michael Thomas got there. I think based off of Joe Burrow doing it with not really a good set of teammates around him, and the team not being as stacked, I gotta say Joe Burrow, man, he showed me a lot. And if the Bengals ever build around him, he could be taken off and create his own dynasty with this Bengals team. And it only comes down to if you're gonna pay your guys, like you said. But I think that's a hot take. But that's how special I think Joe Burrow really is. Now, Drew Brees, there's no disrespect to him; he's an all-time great. But that's how high of a ceiling I think Joe Burrow's prime really can be in the NFL.
Problem with the Bengals not being so damn cheap.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Historically, they cheap. I'm not lying, Chip. I mean, remember
you ain't
Mike
lying.
Brown?
That's why I'm laughing.
Remember TJ Hushmanzada? I think he went on to Herd with Colin Cowherd, and he talked about a story in which something about the
The
water.
Gatorade.
Yeah.
The Gatorade, they had Gatorade, water. I mean, until Marvin Lewis had got there, they had to pay for bills at the door facility, and like, what? Really? I mean, look, everybody want to go out there and party on their yacht, but you ain't gonna get that party unless their franchise wins. So, I mean, stop being cheap, Cincinnati. Before, hey, we say this a lot down south. It can get very darn expensive. You trying to be cheap. It can be what's so cheap right now can be so expensive in the end. So, hey, if you know like I know, you better sign those two bookends at the wide receiver position so you can get Joe Burrow, so you can get back his face. Because remember, the only reason Carson Palmer ever left that organization because he lost faith in the organization.
I see why Thomas went with Drew Brees versus Joe Burrow, because both of them, number 9, known for accuracy. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good one because I was like, let me match these two up against each other. But another point for Joe Burrow, it's like, can the Bengals stop playing games and just give him a defense or something? Because the stats that he had this year, if the Bengals didn't lose, how many games they lose? 8 games or so. If they didn't lose so many games, he would definitely be in the MVP conversation with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen with the stats he had. It was just the team lost so many games. You can't put a guy that was 9-8 in an MVP conversation with the guys that have only lost 3 to 5 games.
Wasn't he nominated for the MVP, Burrow?
Yeah, he's a finalist right now. Last guy who did not make the playoffs and won the MVP, Johnny Unitas.
Wow.
Damn. It's been a long time since that's happened. But that's my point. Like he's done it, even though he's been gifted at the wide receiver position. But other than that, he's had terrible offensive lines. Other than that Super Bowl run that they had, he's had terrible defenses. Other than that year, that defense was all right. But other than that, I agree with you, World Champ. If you ain't gonna pay the guys, there would be. I think everybody around the league, 90% of the league, would do anything they can to get their hands on Joe Burrow in a trade package.
Hey, I'm gonna just be real. If you don't sign Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow ask for a trade, I know a team down south, although we got a new quarterback, that would love to have him.
He just wants to go to Magic City. That's his thing.
Hey, win the Super Bowl, go to Magic City. I mean, you can't ask for them better than that. So,
and then the last 2 quarterbacks. Then we'll move on to the next segment. A prime Russell Wilson or the modern day Jaden Daniels that we're seeing today. Which quarterback would you guys take?
Ooh. I'll go with Russ for now. I don't think people have given Russ enough credit for what he did during his time in Seattle. Even though his first year in Denver didn't pan out so well. His second year in Denver was a little bit better though, but I thought Sean Payton, the writing was on the wall. He wasn't Sean Payton's type of guy. In Pittsburgh, okay, Justin Fields, they were 4-2. And he decided to come in. The reason why I believe is because of his ability to throw the football, his ability to throw the ball to George Pickens as well as other targets. For now, I'll say Russell Wilson only because of longevity. But I do believe Jaden Daniels has all the makings for a future franchise quarterback. Like I said, man, I mean, we had RG3 back in 2012. We thought that we would have something with him. Unfortunately, because of injuries and everything else, it didn't pan out the way Washington fans imagined. But 12 years later, we ended up getting Jaden Daniels, who's even better. Took us to the playoffs, took us to the NFC Championship game. The future is bright. It's no question, in my opinion, he's the best quarterback in that division. I like Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts has a lot of promise, but Jaden Daniels is obviously a better passer. And as far as a runner is concerned, if you want to talk about strength, running in between the tackles, I would go with Jalen. But if you're talking about elusiveness, I give Jaden the edge. Yes, I would take Jaden Daniels over Dak Prescott right now. and Lord knows who the Giants are going to have at quarterback. But for now, I say Russ because of longevity. I do think Russ at times he was really a good quarterback. 2015, that's when we saw the best of Russell Wilson, as well as 2019, 2020. I think Russ has gotten a bad rep because, as the champ mentioned, he's Captain America. He's not known for great leadership skills and stuff like that. But Russ does perform. And plus, the other thing, and I forgot to mention with Drew Brees, he changed the perception of quarterbacks. Drew Brees, Russell Wilson. Drew Brees is listed at 6 feet tall. Champ has said he's not even that.
He's not that. I've seen him in person. I'm like, dude, oh, that's Drew Brees. And I'm like, no, that ain't. Like, I'm taller than that dude, and I'm barely 6'1". And that's after I take my vitamins in the morning. So I mean, it was like what? No, that ain't him. But
and Russ is about 5'10", 5'11". So they have changed the perception of quarterbacks because you don't have to be 6'4", 6'5", 230, 240 prototypical. You can be 6 feet, 6'1" and above, but can you have success? Can you still make throws inside and outside the pocket? And they've somewhat changed the landscape for quarterbacks. Look at smaller quarterbacks. Look at Baker Mayfield, who a lot of people didn't believe in. And hey, Cleveland, hey, you made a huge mistake on him, but that's a story for another day. But you look at the quarterbacks right now, you don't have to be 6'3", 6'4", 240, 230, prototypical. You can be 5'10", 5'11", 6 feet, not just with Baker. Look at Kyler Murray. Look at with a lot of other quarterbacks in the NFL because of guys like Russell Wilson and Drew Brees. They did change the perception of quarterbacks. So I go with Russ for now, but future long term, and if he wins a Super Bowl, maybe this year, we don't want to ruin that possibility. Hey, Jaden.
What you think, World Champ?
I'm going Jaden Daniels. I'm going to go Jaden Daniels. Reason why is this. When you think about the Washington Commanders, the first name you think about is Jaden Daniels. Early in Russ's career, it took you a while when you mentioned that Seattle Seahawks team to get to his name. And people only thought about him because he was the quarterback of that team. Granted, he did some amazing things with that team, a lot of fourth quarter comebacks. He wasn't really scheduled to be the starter for that team. It was Matt Flynn. But when you think about that team, first thing you think about is Legion of Boom. Then you think about Marshawn. Then you got to think about Pete. By the time you get to Russ, Noomden ran out. So I got to go to Jaden.
Yeah, I like that one there. I would go with Jaden Daniels too. And there's no disrespect there to Russell Wilson because Russell Wilson, I think, is, like you said, PSP. He deserves a lot more credit for the years that he had in the 2010s. But to my point of Jaden Daniels, the fact that he's been so special and he became so mature heading into the NFL. And just a side note, I think college football, the way how the game is going, with Jaden Daniels having over 50 starts in college football with the NIL deal, stay in school, get your education, get the millions while you can in school, and you can mature to be a sensational rookie like Jaden Daniels has. I mean, he's been more effective as a leader carrying a franchise this young in his career. Like World Champ said, when you look at that Seahawks team that did get that one ring that they all had together, that year 2013, that was because of Legion of Boom, how they shut down one of the greatest offenses of all time, Peyton Manning and the Broncos in the Super Bowl. So I feel like it did take up into 2015, like PSP said, with Russell Wilson. Probably one of, if not the best year that he had with Seahawks when they got the Super Bowl in 2015. He had a star-studded year, but then the unfortunate pick happened at the goal line. But other than that, I would say I'll take Jaden Daniels because I feel like if you could get this far with a lot less in your rookie year, what are you going to do when the franchise builds the team more around you with the cap space they got and they get more to help him continue going these long runs? But it does go to PSP's point, longevity, and that matters in the NFL. So hopefully Jaden Daniels can keep it up. But from what I see right now, I take him over prime Russell Wilson.
I got a better one. 2015 Super Bowl. 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 2015 Prime Russell Wilson or prime Jalen Hurts?
Oh, I'm taking prime Russell Wilson. And that goes to the point of Russell Wilson. It did take him some time to mature, but Jalen Hurts, I don't think he's. A lot of people say he's overrated. I don't think he's overrated. I think he's in the right spot that he should be in. I think that he is a dual threat quarterback that can do make plays with the arm, make plays with his leg, but you don't have to ask him too much because the Eagles, Howie Roseman and company, they always put a stacked team around him. So as long as he's doing his job, doing what he's supposed to do, not turning over the football and making the plays that he needs to make, then they'll continue to be an effective team when the ball is in his hands and he's asked to do his job. But I think prime for prime, I would go with Russell Wilson over Jalen Hurts.
I'm taking Russell Wilson as well over that because yeah, but I've said this before. I don't understand the criticism on Jalen Hurts. It's kind of like somebody blaming you because your parents raised you right. Like, that's not my fault. It's not my fault that a franchise. And remember, when he first got there, that franchise was in disarray.
Yeah, they were going through a lot.
They was going through it. It's like, when they first got there, you had the Carson Wentz disaster. They was trying to find another franchise quarterback. He was drafted in the second round. People didn't even think that he could play. They didn't even think that he could play the quarterback position because he didn't have, and I can tell you this because I'm an SEC guy, he didn't have necessarily the rocket arm and the mechanics that a lot of other quarterbacks had. That's how come he lost his position, at Alabama to Tua eventually and ended up transferring to Oklahoma. And it wasn't until Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley kind of, put his little spin on it that we got to see him be the passer that we know he can be, but granted, because he was, in the Heisman conversation. He was in the Heisman conversation. Almost was the third straight Heisman winner from Oklahoma. So I don't get the criticism about Jalen Hurts. Number one, when he first came in the league, it was not a lot of expectation. Number two, he stabilized the franchise that, guess what? Doug Peterson got fired. You had the Carson Wentz disaster. They were still searching for a franchise quarterback. I think his second year as the full-time starter, he took them to the Super Bowl, nearly won. It wasn't until last year after Shane Steichen and that franchise went back into disarray that you saw the trouble with it. And that was the turnovers because he was trying to do too much. But as far as prime, I'm taking Russell Wilson. But like I said, with him and Jaden Daniels, when you think about the Commanders, you think about Jaden first. When you think about the Seahawks, you think about the Legion of Boom, Beast Mode, Pete Carroll, Paul Allen, the general manager, and people like that. And then you think about Russell Wilson on down the line because he was the quarterback. When you think about this team this year, you think about Jaden and how he's doing more with less and going out here and, dominating the best teams in the league. Who would have thought he was going to beat Tampa? Who thought? People don't understand this. People not talking about this. He's beat the Eagles before.
Mm-hmm.
In which a game in which he threw 5 touchdowns in that game.
After throwing 2 interceptions, they thought the game was over.
Yeah, and that's the thing I don't understand with Eagles fans. I've listened to some Eagles fans on YouTube, and they try to diminish Washington's victories against Detroit because, Detroit didn't have their 5 starters, but at the same time, it was at Detroit. Washington had issues stopping the run. They're 30th in the NFL in stopping the run. And for a rookie quarterback under those circumstances to play this well and no turnovers, when you commit no turnovers in that game and when the opposing offense commits 5, obviously you're going to win that game. And to play clean football and to play that well and efficient and to take chances, that tells you something. I understand the Champ's point because when you think of the Commanders, you really think of Jaden Daniels because before you weren't thinking about Jaden Daniels if you were a Washington Commanders. When you think of the Commanders, you think of moribund, atrocious, pathetic, all the other things with Dan Snyder. Now with Jaden Daniels as a quarterback, you think hope, change, inspiration, Super Bowl contenders. I understand to Champ's point when you think of the Legion of Boom, Pete Carroll. I just don't think Russell Wilson has gotten his recognition or due. Not even one time. I don't think he was voted for an MVP or had any MVP votes.
His
And he
first
was considered
All-Pro
a
was in
top 10 quarterback.
2015.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was second team then. But,
Man.
I mean, as far as being the best in the league, if it wasn't for, look, one person, which we're not going to say his name on this podcast, one person did bring up a valid point. He should be considered the MVP of this league. Jaden Daniels should. And the only reason that he's not is because he's a rookie. Because when you think about all of these guys that are in MVP conversation, look at who they have. They have, when you think about Joe Burrow, he has Brown. He has Jamar Chase. He has T. Higgins. He has an offensive coach. When you think about Lamar, Harbaugh is known for offense. He's under the Andy Reid coaching tree. How can you not learn offense? Then you have Todd Monken, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews. He's a Pro Bowler, regardless of what people may think. He's a Pro Bowler, all pro. Then you have Isaiah Likely. Then you have a good defense. When you think about Josh Allen, you got a James Cook. You have a good defense. When you think about all of these guys that are in the MVP race, they have weapons. They have something that you can hang your hat on. But when it comes to Jaden Daniels, guess what? He has a two-back system, and those two running backs that he had, their availability rate is pretty much on and off. That's been the knock on them their entire career.
Yeah. Look at Brian Robinson Jr. And remember, he had that horrible leg incident. Remember when he was champ?
Yeah,
I don't want to say it. But when you look, and I understand it's because he's a rookie. If he were a second year, third year player, he would have been the MVP.
Mm-hmm.
And especially Washington, there was no expectations for them. For them to go this far with him, that should tell you something. But I believe Jaden is our future. No question about it.
Yeah, y'all do got something special with him. I will hold on to him as tight as I could because I like to have a QB like that. But we're gonna switch here to the next segment. We're gonna pivot here to the world of wrestling. So your guys' wrestling videos, man, it gets me fired up being a wrestling fan, and you guys are pretty passionate about that. So for the next segment, we're gonna be sharing our greatest wrestling factions in wrestling history. So there's been a lot of great factions in the world of wrestling. So what are your guys' favorites when it comes to the greatest factions in wrestling?
For me, look, I've said this. Stone Cold Steve Austin is my GOAT. Austin 316. I just whipped your you-know-what. King of the Ring 1996. Remember, it was orchestrated for Triple H to win it. But that didn't happen, of course, because of the curtain call. When Steve cut the promo the next night on Raw, you saw the Austin 316 signs. And then Champ has talked about this multiple times, and he makes a very legitimate argument. The turning point of the Attitude Era was WrestleMania 13. Bret the Hitman Hart versus Steve Austin in a submission match. Bret, at the time, he was the babyface. Steve was the heel. And times were navigating because we were in, South Park, D-Generation X, which, by the way, if you did those things back in them day, boy, you got punished. You'd be sent to the principal's office during that time. And Steve, the reason why I love Steve is because in ring, he could wrestle with all of them. Had not been for the neck injury. Mic skills. He could say and talk as much trash as anybody else. He was bad. He was rebellious. He gravitated to a lot of people. And he was the type of person that you wanted to emulate because a lot of times, look, all of us have jobs. And even though we have bosses that are sometimes fair, sometimes our bosses really do. I mean, we do have issues with our bosses, and sometimes we do want to retaliate against our bosses. And Steve did that. I mean, with Mr. McMahon, I mean, you think after Mr. McMahon with obviously the Montreal screw job, I mean, look at him and Steve, the hospital incident when Steve had to play the doctor and hit Vince in the head with the bedpan, or the Corvette when he had to spray when he put cement in Vince's Corvette. I mean, Austin McMahon, the rivalry, I think it's my opinion the best rivalry in wrestling because the biggest heel in Mr. McMahon going up against one of the top baby faces in Steve, it was must-see TV because they wanted to see what could Austin do. I mean, the beer truck, driving a Zamboni to the ring. I mean, Steve was bad. He was badass. He was rebellious. And then Shawn Michaels, great in-ring performer. I mean, his second turnaround in wrestling. I mean, the first match after the 4 years, him facing Triple H at SummerSlam. Shout out to my guy Grant. He's been a guy on our podcast. He is the biggest Shawn Michaels fan, and he'll tell you just how great Shawn Michaels was as a performer. So I would say Steve, because of my opinion, he's the GOAT, and because of what he meant to wrestling, although he did for a short period of time, you look at it and you say, can anybody do that? And even Champ said it himself. He told me he was the reason why I started watching the WWF. He was watching WCW.
Mm.
So we're going to greatest wrestler or greatest wrestling faction?
Oh, faction, but PSP went the different route with this one.
Okay.
My fault.
Now you had some good stuff right there too, though.
All right. Since PSP went greatest wrestler, my greatest wrestler, I say Taker, man. Taker. Look, I don't think people understand the longevity of The Undertaker.
Yeah.
The last person that was relevant during every stage of the wrestling game. He was relevant during the territory days. He was relevant during the golden age. You know, we could just go ahead and say it, the Hulk Hogan stage. He was relevant during that stage. He was relevant during the Attitude Era. Then the PG era, he was that is the only guy who I can really say that as eras went on, he stayed true to his character and it remained popular.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We think about the golden era. He was a heel. He was regarded as a heel. But as the new generation came along, he became a babyface. Then you had the Attitude Era. Next to Austin and The Rock, he was one of the biggest stars in the industry. Think about who headlined SummerSlam. It was The Undertaker, Stone Cold. Then the pay-per-view after that, it was The Undertaker and Kane. Well, excuse me. Yeah, it was The Undertaker and Kane with Stone Cold as the guest referee.
Yeah.
The irony of Stone Cold being PSP's GOAT is the first title shot that Stone Cold ever got was at Cold Day in Hell in 1997. Was
98.
No, it was 97.
Oh, you talking about WrestleMania 4? Oh, remember when you told me what Undertaker was going to do to Shawn at WrestleMania?
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But a Cold Day, go back and look at it. It was right after the Undertaker won the WWE title at WrestleMania 13.
Oh, yeah.
Cold Day in Hell. It was the first time that Stone Cold and The Undertaker went head to head. So you got to say The Undertaker, man. Undertaker is a GOAT. He was pretty much the man in the WWE after Andre unfortunately passed away. He was the man in the locker room for a very, very long time. And not to mention, like I said, for your popularity and your longevity to go from the golden era, which let's just face it, the golden goose was Hulk Hogan, but your popularity was right up there with it. And then, not only that, you're one of the last wrestlers to survive the territorial days. Most of the guys during the territory days, they're either old and, really can't move around that good, but you're one of the guys who experienced the territorial days that was able to not only your reign as a superstar survived Hulk Hogan all the way up to Roman Reigns, who's the biggest star in the WWE today. So you faced every relevant superstar from Hulk Hogan, and you beat Hulk Hogan in your first month in the WWE at Texas Tuesday. And then not only that, you ended your career with one of the most popular stars in modern era. So for you to survive almost 5 decades worth of wrestling, 5 decades worth of wrestling, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, all the way up to the 20s, and you are still relevant to this day, that says something about not only your character in the wrestling business, but who you are. So I have to say my GOAT is The Undertaker.
Yeah, y'all had some good points. We'll pivot back to the faction thing after this because y'all had a lot of good points. Now, there's four. If I had a favorite, it'd be The Undertaker. But there's 4 people that just like stand out to me. Like if I had a wrestling Mount Rushmore, I think these 4 guys would make it. Stone Cold, like PSP said. I mean, the face of the Attitude Era. I think he is one of the greatest promo talkers of all time. Well, like you said, how Austin 316 was one when he won the King of the Ring tournament years and years ago. I mean, he's had a lot of marquee moments that go down in wrestling history as some of the greatest moments of all time. Then I think of The Rock. I mean, that was Stone Cold Steve Austin's favorite wrestling mate, and he was his soulmate in the ring. And the way how he could cut promos, he was another big star in the Attitude Era. One of the reasons why they eventually put WCW out for good, because they didn't, it would have happened to them. So The Rock was a good in-ring performer, a good trash talker, someone that had the persona, the character to get the crowd to invest in you. And then World Champ, The Undertaker, that will always be my guy. I mean, the fact that you just touched up on that 5 decades of survival, like you said, from Hogan all the way to the number one guy, Roman Reigns. He has faced the top faces of the company, from Hogan, Austin, Cena, Reigns. I mean, he's been there with them all. And he's had some great personas of the Dead Man, the American Badass. I think he's the WrestleMania GOAT of all time with the streak. I don't think that should have ever ended. But I put John Cena in there too, based off of what he did, from having to carry on and starting off the ruthless aggression, having to carry the company from guys like Austin and The Rock and several others that departed because their days were over. Cena did a good job, and it wasn't his fault that he was over pushed the way Vince wanted to be over pushed. But I think Cena, the times that he had being a world champion, being there with some all-time greats, he's got some moments up there that are one of the best moments of all time in wrestling too. So if I had a favorite, it would be The Undertaker, but I think those 4 guys stand the test of time. So I got to definitely mention them.
That's tough though, because again, what about Flair?
See, that's tough. And I think Ric Flair is good. See, it's tough when you talk about wrestling because there's so many eras that people like, and like the people where you like it depends on like where your taste is at and how much you invest. Like I think Ric Flair is good, but then if I were to pull somebody that's been watching it for a while, like you guys been watching the product for a while, if I pull up how the pace is now compared to how someone like Ric Flair did it in his heyday, it's like, okay, well, how you rank them compared to each other? But I would say Ric Flair is definitely all-time great too, and definitely one of the best promo talkers as well.
What about Shawn Michaels? I have him as greatest in-ring performer.
Yeah, and I think for Shawn, Shawn was so great as an in-ring performer. He could have a damn good match with a broomstick, broom and dustpan. That's how good Shawn was. He'll elevate the broom and dustpan if he had to in a match. But if you talk about greatest in-ring performers, if I had a list, Shawn would be in there. Bret Hart would be in there. AJ Styles would be in there. There's a lot of Kurt Angle as well. There's a lot of great in-ring talent.
Owen Hart.
Owen Hart as well too is an honorable mention too. Yeah, Shawn was definitely special too. Definitely somebody that is an all-time great too. There's a lot of all-time greats.
I think one of my most underrated wrestlers of all time, Mick Foley.
Yes. Yep.
He doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, because they look at the fact that he's put a lot of guys over, like Randy Orton and Edge. But boy, he takes punishment like no other. And the promos that he cuts, and the fact that he was able to have success with 3 different characters, from Cactus Jack to Mankind. And then, I mean, he was on the commercials. Mick was, I mean, very articulate. I don't think people give enough credit to Mick Foley as far as like with his promo skills or like his wrestling ability. So I think people kind of underestimated him because you look at him physically and you say, how does he stand out? He's not the most athletic guy in the world, but man, he takes punishment. Like, go back to 98 King of the Ring when he fought Undertaker. Forget the fact that he got thrown off the top of the cage. Think of when he got choke slammed and then thumbtacks.
Yeah, that's true also.
When I think about matches, though, oh, my bad. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. You're good.
When I think about matches, I don't think people give Ric Flair the credit that he deserves about matches are concerned. Because, look, when you think about 1 hour matches, people try to bring up Shawn Michaels in that Iron Man match. Ric Flair was doing that every night back in the 80s and the 90s.
That was wild.
I mean, he was doing it for an hour a night. Barry Windham, Dusty Rhodes, the Road Warriors, everybody. Putting over Kerry Von Erich, God rest his soul, one of the Von Erich brothers, shortly after Mike Von Erich passed away, for the World Heavyweight title. An hour to a finish. So when you talk about the Iron Man matchup, that all of that came from Ric Flair. And the fact of the matter was he was he was a partier. He was doing that as a partier. So the fact that he was able to do that and do it for almost 2 decades, not only that, you leave one promotion and do great things, then go to WWE, you're automatically over.
That's true also. I think when I say that, I maybe should have put that in better context because Rick wasn't a bad in-ring performer. I think it's just the way of like I said, like if you compare styles. But there's a lot of Ric Flair matches that I still to this day look back at. I look at that Royal Rumble. I forgot what year it was where he won it and had cut. After that, he cut one of the greatest promos in wrestling history with the WWF title. I think of that, and I think of that WrestleMania 24 match that he had with Shawn Michaels. That might be in the conversation for one of his greatest matches of all time, and with Shawn Michaels as well. But moments like that make me think, like, yeah, Rick was pretty good at what he did based off of the effort that he gave. And like you said, World Champ, I didn't know this as a wrestling fan until last year when I watched some footage on YouTube of Ric Flair. I didn't know he was a party animal like that either. The man was going out consistently drinking every night. I did not know that until last year. And I'm thinking he was really out there like that, doing that.
He was partying like that back in them days. I mean, yeah. But Champ and I, and we've talked about this. If there's one person we ever want to talk to wrestling, talk to Jim Cornette. Even though Champ calls him colorful, because if wrestling were not his destiny, he would have one hell of a career in comedy because he's so hysterical. But man, I just love watching Jim Cornette talk about wrestling. I watch Dark Side of the Ring, WWE Legends. Anytime when I listen to Jim Cornette speak about wrestling, him and Jim Ross, it's just refreshing. If there was ever a podcast Champ and I would love to do regarding wrestling with BRF, it would be them two, the two Jims.
Yes.
I don't blame you guys for that.
Yes. You got to give Ric Flair credit, man. He made it cool to be the bad guy. You talk about an anti-hero. We talk about anti-hero back in the Attitude Era, man.
But with the drip, he had the drip too.
Yes, man. Look, he had the whole perm, had the Bobby Womack with the whole stuff like that with the blonde hair. I ain't never seen a dude have that damn bouncy like that, because when he had his hair freshly permed like that, that was amazing. I don't know how he kept it that way when he got to the ring. But for him to go out there, be the heel, and people talk about Money Mayweather and these guys these days, talking about how much money they are making. Ric Flair revolutionized that. Talking about how much money you making, talking about the cars you drive, buying the $2 million house, even back in the 80s, saying you got a limousine sitting outside a mile long. And then you having to look, he kind of reminds you of that group of him and the Four Horsemen in their heyday. Remind you of the quarterback and the group of friends that you hated in high school. That's who they reminded you of. They remind you of that quarterback that he knew he was the man. He knew he was going Division I, and his running back and his receivers were all his friends, and they all knew they was going to Division I, and then they was going to the league, and everybody else knew it, but he was going to let them know about it every chance he got, and he made it cool to be a heel. And the Four Horsemen being the first heel group, I will say, and making it cool to be the bad guy. People talk about doing the Attitude Era. It was cool to be bad doing the Attitude Era. No, Ric Flair made that cool before the Attitude Era. This was back in the 70s and 80s when you had action hero after action hero after action hero. You know, the Stallones, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, and all of that. He made it cool to be the bad guy. I mean, he made you want to be a horseman and throw up the four fingers. So.
Yeah, and I definitely would say that someone like Rick revolutionized the game. I mean, we could talk about the guys that we mentioned, like Stone Cold, The Rock, but for a heel persona world champ, I'll agree. Ric Flair was that guy. Like, if you want to build the perfect heel with the superstar characteristics and someone that can make the crowd like envy you, I would say Prime Ric Flair was that guy to do that.
I would take Prime Triple H.
Prime Triple H,
because of good old JR. Good old JR.
Bruh. His commentary for him was wild. All the chain for Triple H. Yeah, Triple H is another guy too.
Oh man, but yeah, shout outs to Triple H. To Champ's point, I don't think he gets enough credit because people look at, he's a part of the McMahon family, but what he has done for wrestling the past couple of years, especially with the WWE, has been great, especially like with the women's wrestling. Him and Sean has done a great job with NXT. I agree with BRF, and he said it on my pod. There better be a wing for Triple H in the Hall of Fame, not just his wrestling, what he accomplished as a wrestler, but also what he's doing now for the WWE and moving forward.
Yeah, he's gotten in one time for DX. He might get in twice, but being an in-ring performer and then what he's doing now, he might get in 3 times.
Deservedly so.
Yeah, deservedly so, especially when you think about what him and Shawn Michaels is doing for that women's division. And, I'll say this in a mild way. Yes, they are what we like to call back in the 90s, they are eye candy, but they are wrestlers and athletes first. And I'm glad that they're taking the steps in order to do that. Because back when Sable was wrestling, we wasn't necessarily looking at Sable and saying, look how good of a wrestler she is. We wasn't necessarily worried about that wrestling. With these women's wrestlers nowadays, we're paying a hell of a lot more attention to the wrestling than we are the looks and everything of that nature. So you got to give credit to them in going to get athletes. These young women are actual athletes, and they are killing it out there. So, I mean, big ups to them because they're taking. Who would have ever thought that Vince McMahon would not be a part of wrestling anymore? And you hand that baton to a student of the game like a Triple H who was a fan of wrestling, who literally was a sponge. I mean, hung around some of the greatest minds in wrestling for many years, from Killer Kowalski to Vince McMahon to the Click. to everyone. Now he's emulating everything that he's seen there, and now he's emulating it now. If you really look at wrestling back then, people think it's new now, but if you really look at a lot of the promos that Triple H and a lot of the guys were involved in back then, it's really history repeating itself. And they're just rewriting it in a way that can relate to today, because back during the Attitude Era, they had no chill. So you really can't do that no chill stuff today, even though it's on Netflix at this point. But hey, you got to give Triple H a lot of credit, man, for everything that he's done.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So we're gonna move on to the final segment here. So this time we'll talk about our favorite wrestling groups / factions of all time. So which groups and factions stand out to you guys as your favorite of all time?
Evolution.
There you go.
Evolution. Past, present, and future. People will say it was the modern day version of the Four Horsemen, but better, because they were so visible. Not to mention, it was better, in my humble opinion, than the Four Horsemen, because the thing was, although Batista played Arn Anderson to Triple H's Ric Flair, he went on to be a multiple-time World Heavyweight Champion. Arn Anderson was never able to step out of that shadow and be a world champion. Neither Tully Blanchard nor the other guys in that group either, regardless of who you put in the group. And when you did have other main event stars in the Horsemen, like when you had Sting and Sid Vicious and stuff, and guys like that, they kind of stood out, but you knew they didn't belong in the group.
Yeah.
It's like these guys, it's like, yeah, Sting looks good in the Horsemen, but he's a little bit too big for that group. That's not going to last long. Yeah, Lex Luger looks good in the Horsemen, but that's not a good look. You know, it's only a matter of time. The Horsemen was at its best when it was Ole and Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Ric Flair. And to Triple H's credit and Vince's credit, they made it better, because guess what? After Triple H, then you went on and you had a Randy Orton. Then you went on and you had a Batista. Not to mention, they was able to keep Ric Flair, even at his age, over for an even longer period of time. Remember, when he was in Evolution, he had a knockdown, drag-out, 1-hour cage match against Randy Orton at Taboo Tuesday. So the way they was able to get that group to spin off and be world champions, unlike the Horsemen did, like I said, Batista played Arn Anderson to Triple H's Ric Flair, but he was able to branch off, unlike Arn Anderson was, and become a world champion and become just as big, if not bigger. You saw Randy Orton play Tully Blanchard to Triple H's Ric Flair, but he went on to win multiple world championships, not to mention become the biggest heel, arguably, in the history of wrestling. When you think about Randy Orton as a heel, it doesn't get any worse than getting punted in the head. It doesn't get any worse than that. So you learn from the master, quote unquote, I will say, Triple H, on how to be a heel. And then not only do you spin off, become world champion, you become an even bigger heel than he did. So as far as greatest factions in the world, especially when they were together at their peak, all of them being world champions. And look, they didn't just become world champions by beating run-of-the-mill guys. Armageddon 2003, you got to remember who they beat. Randy Orton beat Edge, one of the greatest intercontinental and world champions of all time. When Ric Flair and Batista beat the Dudleys to win the tag team champions at Armageddon, the best tag team champions in the Dudley Boys, other than I will say the Road Warriors. I will always have a special place in my heart for the Road Warriors. Outside of the Road Warriors, the Dudley Boys are the best tag team champions of all time. Then you had Triple H beat two of the biggest superstars in wrestling, probably of all time. When you think about Kane and Goldberg, granted, Goldberg's mat wrestling was not great, but at his peak, his popularity was up there. So when you think about guys who they beat during that time together, not to mention them Evolution going over on the Rock and Sock connection, kind of passing that torch over from the Attitude Era to the Ruthless Aggression Era, and Randy Orton becoming the youngest world champion of all time, going over on one of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time. Can't say his name, but we all know who he is. At SummerSlam of 2004, that is why I put them as the greatest group. Not just because how you are defined as a group, in my opinion, is not only what you do together, but what you do once you break apart. Because eventually that's going to happen. You come together and you're going to break apart, whether it be from, you turning against each other in wrestling, or someone turning against you, or you just going your own way. But what you do when you break apart says something about, yes, I was a part of this group, but best believe this group stood out because of me. And that's why I will say it's evolution.
Yeah.
Generation X.
Ooh.
Because again, back to the 90s, times were changing. And WWF, they were going up against WCW. So WWF had to go more hardcore, more extreme, and even sexual. I mean, if you did the DX signs back in the day, heck, we all know you got punished. Everyone knows when you do the crotch sign. And on top of that, one of my favorite moments of DX, and this was even after Shawn's departure. Remember how they invaded WCW? Remember that?
Oh, yeah, with the army tank.
Yes. And in the way that they did it, and then Shawn and Triple H reuniting in 2006 to join DX, going after Mr. McMahon and Shane. To which I cannot go into the exact details of what transpired during that time, but just in terms of the aggressiveness, Shawn and Triple H, the promos that they cut, and also it led the door for a lot of opportunities. X-Pac, not just that. Let's not forget, God rest her soul, the great China. I mean, think of the opportunities it landed for her on DX. I mean, like Jim. And then as well as everything else. I think DX, in terms of what they meant, the Attitude Era, pop culture genre. I mean, when you do those signs back in the day, and still to this day, I mean, it resonates. And with Shawn and Triple H being the two guys on top for DX, and how they were in 2006, and then even more. So I think DX, you can make the argument. Evolution is a great argument, but DX, but also not just DX, Champ's point. I'm surprised he didn't bring this one up. NWO.
Mm-hmm.
Because Champ mentioned, yes, Vince McMahon, I may have won the war with WCW versus WWE, but Eric Bischoff did have something to do with it. Remember you talked about that, Champ?
Yeah. People, and thanks for bringing up that point, because I will say this. People always call it the Attitude Era, from, 96 to 98, and 96 to 99. In my humble opinion, that was the NWO era. That was the NWO era. And if you really want to be honest with you, look, I'll go here for a second. If you really want to be honest with you, NWO was WCW's hip hop because everybody was loving the NWO. And it's like DX represented rock and roll. So they went at hip hop with rock and roll. That's what it seems like. Because you think about how cool Nash was. You think about how cool Scott Hall was, and even Hulk Hogan. Funny thing about the whole thing, when they used to say for life, guess where they got that from? They got that from Mac 10. They got that from Mac 10 when he said for life. Yeah. So when you think about, you know, the NWO, it was pretty much the NWO era versus the Attitude Era. It was virtually hip hop versus rock and roll during that point in time because Triple H and those guys was the rock and roll group versus the NWO's hip hop. Because like I said, NWO's roots was basically hip hop. There was a lot of the black and white, all of the look, people can hate Hulk Hogan all they want, and I approve of you booing him out of the building. I approve of that. I approve of this. I approve of you booing him out of the building. If he comes to the bingo hall, boo him out of there. But go back and look at Hulk Hogan's outfits. It had a lot of graffiti on there. It had a lot of spray paint on there. Go back and look at Hulk Hogan's outfits back then with the boots with the coloring on there. Go back and look at those outfits and line up a picture of New Edition right next to it. You will see a lot of similarity to it. Because remember, they used to paint their faces on the shirts, on the pants, on the shoes, on the boots. Hell, we was doing that back in 2005, back in our heyday. You know, painting our faces and painting characters on our All-Stars, our Air Force Ones, airbrushing them. Hulk Hogan was doing that back then with the graffiti on the, look at his tights, look at his boots. So when you think about that, it was really like it was like the wrestling version of rock and roll versus hip hop. And the generation that was rock and roll and hip hop was the NWO. And like I said, Kevin Nash really personified that with how he represented the Wolfpack. Remember, people thought the West Side was Wolfpack at one point because he was throwing it up in the ring. So yeah, I mean, it was really the NWO era, in my humble opinion, because it forced WWE to move away from the new generation. Although they had good wrestling, it forced them to bring factions into the fold. It forced them to go get other prime superstars. It forced them to bring out the greatest in those guys, like the Nation, like the Boricuas, like the Disciples of Apocalypse. It forced them to do that. Before 1997, we didn't see that.
No, but the following year, 98, DX, they did able to bring Mike Tyson.
Yeah, they brought Mike Tyson.
True.
Yeah. Remember Mike Tyson in them DX days?
Yeah, I remember that. But like I said, go back. If you think I'm lying about NWO being hip hop, go back and look at
Hulk. Oh, no, it was. The black
go back
on
and
black.
look at Hulk Hogan's tights and look at his boots and look how much graffiti and things of that nature that he had. He called himself Hollywood Hogan, and looking back on it, I understand why he called himself Hollywood Hogan, but really he was hip hop Hogan.
Yeah, y'all had some good points about these factions because I think all three are actually the greatest factions in wrestling history. But I'll go with each one that you guys said. Starting off with Evolution World Champ. Evolution was so special, even from the theme to the drip that all four had and the aura that they had. I mean, they made you like want to like punch them in the face every week you tuned into Raw to watch them. And that goes back to our point of Triple H being one of the most diabolical heels of all time, especially his run in the early 2000s as a heel. That man would do anything to hold that world heavyweight title. And he showed it in his character because not only would he do anything to hold the title, that's what drove the group away from each other. When Randy got the title, they immediately turned on him the next night. And when Batista was driven to get the title, Batista eventually turned on them. But when you look how good the faction was, this goes back to your point again, World Champ, past and present. Triple H, Nature Boy Ric Flair, 2 all-time greats, and then you turn to the future. They groomed and developed stars of Randy Orton, Batista to be world champions. And look how all 4 respective careers turned out. I mean, Triple H and Ric Flair were made, but Randy and Batista, they went out to do their thing. And with all of them holding the gold on Raw in the early 2000s, that right there just showed me what a picture-perfect wrestling faction is supposed to look like. And I don't think, as special as maybe the modern times, like the Shield or the Bloodline, nothing looks as special as what Evolution did back then. So, yeah, that was some good stuff there, and definitely something that hits home. At PSP, what you said about DX, I agree 100% because what Triple H, Shawn, and China were doing back in the late '90s, they were putting up a fight. Because if you look at those Monday Night War ratings, WCW was blowing them out the water for weeks and weeks, like over a year in time frame.
Oh my God, I forgot one example. The Bill Clinton, the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky one.
Oh yeah, you're right about that. I forgot about that till you said that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were putting up a fight. I mean, they were doing things like the fans that you would watch. I mean, you had women showing their breasts on live television. Like they was going all out. Like DX was wild, and I mean that's what you had to do to make fans invest into you. In the '90s during the Attitude Era, some of the most wildest times in wrestling history. But what they did together, and then the fact that Triple H knew he had to become revolutionary when Shawn had to go down with that broken back, and we didn't know if he was ever going to come back again. For him to take over and as DX and then go on the run that he did, that speaks volumes to how you can adjust as a performer and as a profession based off of somebody. Not saying that Shawn carried him, but Shawn was a big part of that group, and it would never be the same if you plugged in somebody else during that time frame and put them in the group. But the NWO was special too. And I never really thought of the NWO maybe being the hip hop of wrestling back then because they were special and the group was so good to the point where they accidentally ruined the group of the NWO because then you started having at that time you had what? So how many NWOs you had? 3, 4 out there, different versions. It was so good, they accidentally overdid it. So what they did of having Sky Hall and Kevin Nash jump ship from WWF to WCW for the money, they made it work. It just turned out that your competition was just a little bit better than you. So at their standpoint, they just accidentally messed it up. That's how good that group was. And then I think when they got to the WWE eventually, the group wasn't as special as they were in the '90s. But yeah, I think all 3 of those factions were really special. And I think all 3 of those automatically are the best wrestling factions of all time.
Yes, indeed. Hey,
No question.
When you are the one thing about NWO, man, the one thing about a faction, the one thing the NWO did that I don't think any other group can do, is you could throw anybody off the street a T-shirt, put the NWO colors on them, and say for life, and you made them an extra superstar overnight. Everybody knew their name. I mean, you did that. I mean, everybody knew Buff Bagwell, but when they put for life on him, he became even bigger. Everybody knew who Scott Steiner was, part of one of the greatest tag teams of all time. You put the NWO colors on him, he became even bigger than ever. I mean, and that was the same with all of them. When you Hulk Hogan was huge back in the 80s. But he put them black and white colors on, put the graffiti on, put the boots on. Guess what? He became an even bigger star.
You even got Dennis Rodman there.
Bro, oh my God.
Yes.
Dennis Rodman and Carmen Electra. He even got them on there, man. And I mean, that was special, man. That was real, real special. For you to have in the middle, right on the heels of the NBA Finals, for you to have 2 of the biggest stars in wrestling in DDP and Hollywood Hogan in the ring, and then have Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone there. That was something special, man. So good job, PSP, for breaking that up, man. I didn't think about that, man.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, man, that's amazing. I didn't even think about that. That's cool.
I mean, you told me about NWO. I knew how great they were, but of course, that was the thing back in the day before the Attitude Era.
Yeah, it was an NWO era because, like I said, from '96 to like '98, it was pretty much the NWO ruling TV. Like everybody loves Stone Cold, but look, I'm just gonna be real. The only shirt back in my day when I was in middle school, going from transitioning from elementary school to middle school, one of the wrestling shirts that you could put on and go to a party and it still look good, and you can put your Space Jams on and you can wear it, and people say, "Oh man, you rocking that." You put that black and white NWO shirt on and put them Bo Jacksons on, or put a pair of the Space Jam Jordans on with that. That's gonna draw some hell. Football players was wearing the NWO shirts. They was doing it on national television, throwing up the Turkish wolf sign and doing that thing. That was epic, man. That was epic.
Yeah, it's just special times in wrestling, and they're doing their thing today. But in terms of factions, like the modern day, like the Shield or the Bloodline or the guys like the New Day, they're doing their thing. But those three, I don't think there will be another faction that will ever top off what those three did in wrestling history.
I don't think so either because pop back then, pop culture was big. When you crossed over into pop culture back then, it took a lot more work. Nowadays, everybody's paying attention to it 24 hours. But when you cross over back then, it was something special. And when you have guys who were singers and who were dancers and who were rappers and everybody else wearing the NWO shirts, that was special. And not to mention, look, it was cool to be the bad guy. They made it cool again to be the bad guy. Like I said earlier, the first group to make it cool to be the bad guy was the Four Horsemen. But Hogan and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, they made it even cooler, and they added that feel to it. And especially with the Jimi Hendrix music playing in the back, and then people don't underestimate how good the Wolfpack was. The NWO Wolfpack. People don't understand how cool it was to hear C Murder rap, the brother of Master P, rap on a WCW theme. And it was one of the hardest verses that you ever want to hear. People don't understand that. That's how come I said the NWO was hip hop versus the Generation X, it was rock and roll. Because and all the evidence that you need is all the nuances. Too Sweet, For Life. And then to top it all off, C Murder rapping on the Wolfpack beat on the Titantron. So that was a special time, man.
Yeah, some great times, but we definitely had some great times tonight. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching and listening. This is your host, Thomas Tyree, signing off. And once again, thank you guys, the host of the Sports PSP podcast, PSP himself, a world champ. Thank you guys for joining. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime soon. Before we wrap it up, where can we find you guys on your social media platforms / podcast accounts?
I'll let Champ go first.
You can always find me on my Main Man's podcast tomorrow night at 9:00. So where there's a party, you will see the world champ with PSP. So check that out tomorrow night, man. He has a special show lined up for you. I'll say this on every show I go on, especially when PSP is included. I would not be here without PSP. He gave me my first big break, brought me on my first podcast. I was nervous as hell. I didn't even know if I was going to survive one. But eventually, he was able to coach me, and I was able to get my own podcast, which you will see on Saturday on at 9:00, which I do with BRF and Flash. So he was able to do things with me, and I was able to spin off and get my own podcast. Now, we always come back home, but I have my own platform as well. Don't forget to check us out on TikTok, however long that may last at this point in time. But and you can look if you really want to see exactly what we can do. If you're not a YouTube person or TikTok person, check us out on Instagram. PSP and myself do a hell of a lot of collaborations. He's done some collaborations, a hell of a lot of collaborations on his podcast. He's done a lot on mine. And if you check out both the podcasts, you'll see a treat. You will see a treat, man. But big ups to PSP, man. I wouldn't be on this podcast without him. So I thank you. And as always, I salute you. And Mr. Thomas, thank you for inviting us on here. Like I tell everyone when they invite me, it's a privilege and a pleasure and an honor because guess what? You took time out of your day in order to talk to us and bring us on. So thank you for bringing us on your platform and thank you for inviting us. Hope to get another invitation back. I extend a salute to you as well.
Yeah, you definitely will. Thank you, World Champ.
And y'all know where to follow me at Sports PSP, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Thank you again to Champ and everyone else. Thank you again, Thomas, for having us on your pod, man. And don't worry, we'll definitely be back on the pod. I just want to thank a lot of people, Champ, BRF, Brendan from the block, Broad, a lot of people who actually help out with the Sports PSP pod. Thank you again for doing everything. Already at 65,000 on YouTube. So we're just going to continue to do whatever we can. Hopefully we'll get by 100,000 by the end of this year, but destined for great things. And as Chad mentioned, we're going to have a hell of a show tomorrow night. So stay tuned for the Sports PSP pod, or as Champ calls it, the highlight of Friday nights.
Patent, copyright.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining. And definitely we'll chop it up soon. Hopefully I can come on your guys' show, and I'll definitely have you guys back on in the near future.
Absolutely.
But we're going to sign off. Thank you guys for watching, listening. Your host, Thomas Tyree here, and I'll see you guys on next week's episode.